Hello, this is part 51 of our comparative Bible study on the beginning of Jesus Galilean Ministry. During this part, we would like to have a preliminary discussion on the word righteousness. Overall, this is our 91st New Testament Bible study. Twice here in the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, we see the word righteousness used. In verse 10, we read, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Up in verse 6, we read, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." So, what is righteousness? Or more specifically, what could the word righteousness mean in these two verses? I'd like to try to address this question in three phases. First, with respect to translation. Second, comparison with another word. Thirdly, righteousness with and without the law. Okay, beginning with translation. Before we talk specifically about the word righteousness, I'd like to make some general comments about translation. There are different Bible translation techniques that are used in various versions. On one hand, I've heard it described that certain Bible translations, arguably the King James, is a word for word or literal translation. Granted, some literal translations are more literal than others, and there's probably some leeway in that word for word and literal designation. It appears to me that even the King James Bible could have been done even more literally, and there's room for improvement. Another style is often described as a thought for thought translation. An example of a thought for thought method, I believe, is dynamic equivalence used by the NIV and New Living Translation. So, at least on the surface, it appears that these translations are not as concerned about taking a particular word from one language and rigidly translating that into a similar word into another language, but instead are more focused on trying to capture the thought or essence of a passage and trying to convey that thought from one language into another language. At least that's the way that I think I understand it now. Of course, it seems that all translations are only as good as the translators. I have used these thought for thought translations in the past, and I can see some value in using them as a comparison. However, that being said, for more in-depth Bible study, I really like a literal translation, ideally with a concordance, such as the King James Version and Strong's Concordance. I believe the goal of Bible study is to learn what God is telling us. The more clearly and purely we can see God's true word, the better. Unfortunately, even literal translations, despite the interpreter's best efforts, can sometimes seem inconsistent. Maybe it could be that the word in the original language doesn't have an exact match in the language that it's being translated to. Sometimes they have to use a couple of different words to try to get a more exact match, and one word fits into one situation, but maybe it doesn't fit into the other situation. Or at least possibly that could be another explanation for the apparent variations. This is why a concordance or some other tool can be so helpful, especially for those of us who cannot read Hebrew and Greek. Of course, it would be really great if we could actually read and understand the original Hebrew and Greek scriptures. But when we can't, tools like concordances can help us figure out and compare some of the underlying Greek and Hebrew words. Let's look at some examples. The word that I'm circling right now with the cursor is a Hebrew word that is often translated as righteousness, and it's also translated often as justice. So if we were only going to look at the English translation, it would appear that there are two different words here, righteousness and justice. But in fact, in the original scriptures, there's only one word in the Hebrew. By the way, this Hebrew word here, we're told by Strong's Hebrew Dictionary that it is from another Hebrew word that is often translated as just and righteous and other words. Furthermore, there are other Hebrew words taken from this word according to Strong's Hebrew Dictionary that are translated as just and righteous, justified, and righteousness in other words. For example, these two. By comparison, this Greek word that I'm circling here is a word that is consistently translated as righteousness. Similar to the Hebrew words, this word is translated as righteousness in the Greek is taken from another Greek word according to Strong's Greek dictionary that is translated as just and righteous, among others. Furthermore, there are other related Greek words, for example, this one that I'm circling, which is also from the Greek word here that is translated as justifier and righteous, among other words. So at the very least, when we read a passage such as Romans chapter 3 verses 25 and 26 here, we can look at these circled words and realize that they're all related. I believe another major takeaway from this discussion could be that when we're really splitting hairs on the scriptures, it would be good for us to maybe keep in mind that the English words aren't the main thing. It's the underlying Hebrew and Greek words. So if we're really trying to drill down and figure out what God is saying on a particular issue, maybe it would be good to keep in mind that the original scriptures that God provided were in Hebrew and Greek. And those words may not match up perfectly with our English words. Also, in addition to a concordance, another tool that we might be able to use is a commentary. Some commentaries actually break down this analysis of words. Another trick that might be handy is to compare scriptures in different Bible translations, different versions of the Bible, and sometimes through comparing those usages of different words, different translations of different words, we can come away with a different meaning, or rather a better meaning. And of course, again, these tools are only as good as the person writing the commentary, the translator, even Strong's Hebrew and Greek dictionaries. The definitions in those are only as good as the person who wrote them. But with the Lord's help, both they and we can do things better than what we're capable of. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Please don't let all this talk about translation and tools overcomplicate things and prevent you from reading the Bible. The main thing is just to read the Bible. Honestly speaking, the first 2 or 3 Bibles that I really used or read from were not literal translations. And I believe that there was enough of the Word of God in those Bibles to really grab a hold of me. I'm just hoping to present things here that would maybe help with Bible reading. By the way, I've recently noticed that the New Living Translation will sometimes translate some of these words as right standing. And I think that actually might be a great word to consider. Lord willing, maybe we could talk about that during a future Bible study. If I got to share anything good, it's a blessing from God.